And so I've been sitting with the guides this morning and aligning my frequency. And why I'm mentioning this is because it segues really nicely into one of the questions that's going to come around. So I'll come back to that. So what I'll do is I'll start at the top. And of course, if you do have any questions, pop on to next month's thread and leave any questions there for us. And and we will share a reply with you in the next month's recording. And so I'll read the question first and then share what it's really a co-creation. My work is a co-creation, and I often get asked this by my students: how do you know what's the difference between what you know and what's coming through? And the difference is that it gets much thinner, because as stuff comes through, you learn more. And when people are asking the same things that have already been asked before, or there's the same level of awareness, then of course it's going to be a combination of what I know because I've learned through the guides and what is new to me that I learn when hearing the guides. And what I found actually helped this process the most was letting go of the need to control, but also the need to define in a linear way what's X and what's Y. And this is actually one of the most limiting programs that we have as humans, trying to put things into a box and trying to categorize. And when you come into the layers of the greater reality, there's this recognition that there's an interconnectedness of all things. And from that space, some of those linear compartmentalized questions don't really hold the bearing of what we believe they do when we're coming from the third dimensional construct. And so what I'm going to do is I'll read out the questions, and then I will allow whatever is being co-created through my higher self wisdom, intertwined with what the guides are bringing forward, and share to you the responses. And so the first question is how to hold space as the collective shifts. Now, this is a big question. I'm actually going to try, when I feel more into these questions, there's quite a lot to these questions. So we'll see how much we can get done of the questions that are here. Otherwise, they will roll into the next month, because I really want to allow the depth of what is here, to be shared with each of the questions. And so she goes on to write, beautiful Jennifer, there is so much happening globally that is upsetting and unjust. How do we not enmesh with this energy whilst also not bypassing what is needing our attention and empowered action for the collective? And, I really love this question. And it is something that is quite often on people's minds and on people's hearts. And, when I'm reading it, what's the first thing that comes forward is everything external to us is a reflection of something that is happening on our internal. And so as we allow ourselves to harmonize and make peace with discordance or disharmony that is within us, our perception and awareness of what's happening around us actually shifts. So the more we allow ourselves to enmesh ourselves in the drama, and a lot of the time what is shown to us is that, because this is actually how they have kept the collective under control and away from their higher self beingness, is to continuously bombard people with drama and problems and fear. And what happens is, when we are in a state of fear, that we get disconnected to our higher order thinking. We get disconnected to our true self beingness. And when we are in fear, we go into our hindbrain. That's physiologically, we go into our hindbrain. And what that does is create survival behavior. And survival behavior is all about looking for danger and protecting the self. What is higher order thinking that happens in our frontal cortex when we can only access in a relaxed state is socialization behavior, recognizing consequences for actions, problem solving. Now, all of these things aren't accessible while we are in fear or stress. And while we are looking for danger, which means we are perpetuating that same story or stories because we're adding energy to it. It's like everything is not as it seems. Everything is created by our belief. And I'm sure you've all heard that before, because it is literally creating energy to add to the collective story. So every time we sit in front of the news and hear everything possible that is tragic, that has quite often even been manipulated to create sensationalism, which I'm sure you all know, to create an even bigger problem than most of the time than it really is. And then what this does is gets us to connect in with it and to perpetuate the story even more. I'm sure you can all resonate at times where, it's almost like the old Chinese whispers, when something starts as, oh, so this happened and this happened. And by the time it gets through the 10th person, it's like this and this and this and this. And when you start off with and this, which the media always starts off with, you can just imagine what snowballs, from there. And, it's, everybody is free to choose and do what they like. But our highest recommendation is to disconnect from information that is not whole by cherry picking the absolute worst possible things that are happening in the whole entire world and feeding it to people every single day. They're creating a narrative. They're creating a frequency of fear and disillusion that is taking people away from the capacity to create solutions, from the capacity to come together in community, for the capacity to recognize their consequences for their actions. And so as you breathe into that, feel the magnitude of what's happening by what we expose ourselves to. And I love the other part of the question about what can we do without bypassing? And it's the same goes the other way. Are we bypassing all of the wonderful things by being connected in with the media, by being connected in with the bad news in the world? What about the good news? They're not going to show it to you on the television because the television is also collective programming to serve the very few who control the programming. And that's not a conspiracy theory. Any of you that have known me know that I don't do conspiracy theories. I actually weigh up evidence and, try to understand the best I can of what's actually happening. But some of it is just so blatantly obvious when you start to become aware of all the beautiful and amazing things that are happening in the world as well. You can find it, but you have to go specially looking for the good news. And as you allow yourself to be exposed to more and more of that, you'll see that both always exist. And depending where we're looking is literally where our energy is going. And where our energy goes most of the time is what becomes to be our resonance, because energy comes into resonance with itself. And so the more we expose ourselves to the tragedy and, the train crash that happened in some country that we've never even heard about, that we just had to know in that moment because the media felt that we had to know it. But in the absence of all of the beautiful charity work that's happening in the world, all the beautiful people helping all the people in the world that we don't hear about. And so just taking a moment to breathe into that and breathe into the fact that there is a choice. We are sovereign, free will beings. We just don't know that because of the way that our society is controlled at large by what we believe is possible and what we are programmed to believe by what we're told and by what we're shown. And just breathing into that. And another part of this question is because energy is always mirroring itself. And so this last part of the question is a solution. And because energy is always mirroring itself, the best that we can do is to look within ourselves, access where the disharmony is within us, do the work to understand that more deeply so that it can be released and we can meet our evolution, so that our energy can come back to the truth of how it really is. And that's peaceful. Peace and harmony is actually our true state, believe it or not. But what has happened over time is we get filled with so many stories. Stories from the external, stories from our own experiences in this timeline and others. Stories that have been woven through our DNA ancestry. But in all, our core essence is peace and harmony, because our core essence is love and light. And the walk through this journey is to come back and remember that. It's not to be distracted by all the dramas and all the things that, the outside world tries to capture us with, to take us away from the beauty and the magic that is already here and lead us to believe that there's chaos. Big picture, there's always been chaos. If you look through history, humans have been largely barbaric when they're operating from survival. And the powers that be, the people controlling, whoever it is, the kings, the warmongers, the conquerors, whoever is controlling that pattern puts people in fear, so they do what they're told. And just breathing into that. And so the offer here is to, when you find yourself immersed in problems, firstly, feel into that and see if there's a resonance within you. And if there is, do the work around that. If you're unable to access it, find support. There's so many beautiful therapies and, all sorts of things out there to support us on our journey. And, once we're able to re-access that beautiful peace and harmony within, we start to operate from here, and our perception of the world changes. And as our perception of the world changes and becomes more stabilized, more and more people are already starting to recognize that we're not the dramas. They're already starting to recognize that the news is sensationalized and it is only telling one narrative. The absolutely worst possible one is the narrative. And so doing the inner work and coming back to access the true self and magnifying that will almost immediately change your perception. And then when your perception's changed, you're able to access solutions rather than being stuck in the problems, from the hindbrain. And so really beautiful question. Thank you so much for bringing that forward, because that sort of thing does come up, not infrequently, in client sessions, particularly when they start to close down their heart energy because they start to believe the hype. They start to believe that the world is unsafe and it's chaotic and, all of that. And, not taking away from that reality exists, but there's also another reality that is also existing at the same time. And we get to choose which reality that we desire to stabilize and create more with in our lives. Hopefully that is helpful.